So, after posting a lot of my videos on YouTube, I've had a lot of comments asking me to put out a Frost Mage guide. And I've written one, it's on the Time forums, but a lot of people want to see something in video form, so might as well try that out and see how it goes. It's going to be kind of short, concise. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm not going to kind of show you from the ground up how to play a mage, but I can show you like a quick start guide of how to start raiding as a Frost Mage. I know a lot of people are switching over from Fire from the beginning of the expansion, and they're very curious on how to play Frost, because it's not as easy as it seems. So, starting off, we'll go over some abilities that we use. The main ability that Frost Mage uses, of course, Frostbolt. Frostbolt is a quick cast, and the spec pretty much revolves around it. So as you can see, it launches a bolt of frost at the enemy, causing 125,000, blah blah blah. This is our filler spell. So, I mean, we're casting it, and it does several things. Well, first of all, it procs this right here. This makes our Flurry instant cast. See up here in my buffs, called Brain Freeze. It deals 50% increased damage to Flurry, and it causes Winter's Chill on the target. This is like one of the big things that... my pet to stop attacking here. This is one of the big things that people miss, is because it's not really documented unless you really look at the buffs like I just showed, is Winter's Chill is something that you can definitely take advantage of. What Winter's Chill does is it puts a debuff on the target. It's very short, but it pretty much treats it as frozen. And this is really important for Frost Mages, because when things are treated as frozen, we get a big crit increase for the spells that can actually take advantage of that. Which are most of our Frost spells, actually. So what we want to do when we do that is, for that short window that Winter's Chill is up, you want to toss an Ice Lance into it. Usually, preferably, you want to do that with Fingers of Frost. I mean, without Fingers of Frost. So you just toss an Ice Lance, and it would actually crit. So if I can get that going here, cast a couple. Okay, there we go. So in this situation, my Frostbolt procced Fingers of Frost, and my Brain Freeze here. So when this happens, I want to dump my Fingers of Frost, get my Brain Freeze, and I always want to cast a Frostbolt first, and then right after, and then follow it up with an Ice Lance. And see how the Ice Lance crit without having a Fingers of Frost proc? That's exactly what I want to do there. So the reason why I cast a Frostbolt first there is because this takes advantage of Winter's Chill too. So kind of what happens when we do that combination is that when you cast Frostbolt, it's got a slower travel time than the Flurry, the Brain Freeze Flurry. So the debuff gets applied on that first tick of the Brain Freeze Flurry because it hits 3 times. And when that hits, it applies the debuff, and it refreshes really quickly, kind of... You don't really see it very much, but just trust that it's there. So the debuff gets applied, the Frostbolt hits, Frostbolt crits, providing you're far enough away for that to happen. It's usually within like 10-15 yards. If you're too close, the Frostbolt will actually hit first, which is kind of sketchy, but most of the time you'll be out of melee range, so you should be good with that. So the Frostbolt hits into Winter's Chill, crits, and then after you cast that Flurry, you follow it up directly with an Ice Lance. So I mean, 3 quick GCDs. You get that Frostbolt, Flurry, Ice Lance, and that Ice Lance will crit into that Winter's Chill. So yeah, that's a big thing that people miss, and it's really useful in regards to boosting your damage, and as well as what we'll get into is extending your Icy Veins, because we play with Thermal Void. I know there's a lot of people that play with Glacial Spike here too. That's another build I'm not going to go over, but Thermal Void is pretty much the most common rating ability, rating talent. But we'll get into that in a minute. Alright, so we'll go over a couple of other abilities that we have as a Frost Mage. We already just went over Frostbolt and Brain Freeze, and we kind of touched upon Ice Lance there. Ice Lance is an instant ability. You just kind of chuck it out. You can do it while you're moving. It's actually really nice. So, I mean, if you don't have any Shimmer charges, and you need to move out of some boss's ability, just toss an Ice Lance. It's better than doing no damage. I know you really want to stay away from casting non-Fingers of Frost Ice Lances because they do crap for damage. But, you know, 100k damage is better than 0 damage, pretty much. Alright, so if you play with your water elemental, they have something called water jet. And I don't think I have it on my bars here. There, that's water bolt. Here's water jet. It's on a 25-second cooldown, and it does some damage while it's channeling. It pretty much instantly hits the target. So it's another thing that we have to play around with the travel time. So what we want to do when we are using water jet is once you cast it, you want to make sure you hit 2 frost bolts into that target that you're casting it into. So let me show you here. And actually, the timing of it is very important, and it really relies on haste and distance and the boss hitbox, and it's a real big pain in the butt. But once you practice it, you can kind of get used to it. So pretty much, if we're in a normal situation like this, we're at a decent distance away, it's a normal hitbox, pretty much most circumstances, you want to cast your Frostbolt, and near the end of it, see how I just did that? You want to cast your Water Jet. I casted an extra Frostbolt in there too, but it'll give you 2 Fingers of Frost procs. So that's very important, again, for damage and for extending your Icy Veins with Thermal Void. So that's another core rotation ability. So we got Frostbolt, we got Water Jet, and now we have our artifact ability, which is Ebon Bolt. Ebon Bolt is on a 45-second cooldown. It does fairly high damage, and it also causes you to gain a Brain Freeze proc. So you see how this kind of interacts with the rotation. So here's Ebon Bolt. It's kind of a slow cast. It's a very slow travel time, and it gives you a Brain Freeze proc, which you can then use for Winter's Chill. And I'm not going to wait the 45 seconds, but typically, before you have a Ebon Bolt, before you cast an Ebon Bolt, if you have any other procs, you want to get rid of them. So you don't want to have your Fingers of Frost procs, you don't want to have any more Brain Freeze procs. But I mean, if you do have Brain Freeze proc, it's okay, because Blizz made a change a little while ago that will delay the proc that you get from Ebon Bolt, which is pretty nice. So, you want to get rid of those procs, cast your Ebon Bolt, that'll give you a Brain Freeze proc. Yeah, I might as well wait 10 seconds here. And the reason why we do that is because you want to take advantage of Winter's Chill. You don't want to waste any Ice Lances. So you dump those Fingers of Frost. So if I had one, I'd dump it. So I would have nothing here. Then I cast. And as soon as that's done, I'm hitting my Brain Freeze proc. So what that actually does, if you're over 15 yards and you're using that Brain Freeze proc after Ebon Bolt, like directly after, you should be spamming it because it should be coming up right in spell queuing. It'll make that Ebon Bolt shatter, is what we call it. Remember before I was saying that frozen targets, you'll get higher crit? Well, that'll make that crit, which is pretty huge, because I mean it can crit over 1 million, sometimes 2 million, depending on your gear level. And you also get the Winter's Chill from Brain Freeze, so you can follow that up with an Ice Lance, which again will extend your Icy Veins. So we've done Frostbolt, we've gone over Water Jet, Ebon Bolt, we've done Fingers of Frost procs, just very briefly. Actually, I'll touch on that a little bit more. Fingers of Frost will actually stack up to 3 with one of our artifact abilities. I never really opened this anymore. Where is it here? It's up here somewhere. There it is. Icy Hand. This actually lets you bank another Fingers of Frost charge by 1. So, in general, you would have room for 2 Fingers of Frost procs, which, again, will make your Ice Lances treat the target as frozen, and it'll mostly crit, and we'll go over why in a second. But the artifact ability will let us hold up to 3, which is very nice. It should be baseline, but, maybe eventually. So, when you have Fingers of Frost procs, you want to make sure you're shooting them off, and you want to make sure you're not capping them. The number one thing wrong that I see people do is that they hold on to their procs too long, and they end up overcapping. So you want to make sure that you don't munch procs. We call that munching procs. You ultimately lose procs, because if you sit at 3 Fingers of Frost, and you proc another one with a Frostbolt or a Frozen Orb, which we'll get to in a sec, then you pretty much lose it. And that's lost DPS, and that's a big no-no if that's what you're trying to do. I mean, we're trying to DPS optimally and efficiently, and we need to make use of our abilities and procs accordingly. Okay, so we've gone over Fingers of Frost, Brain Freeze. Those are the two procs that we deal with for the most part. And those are very important, especially with how we use them. And there's kind of some intricate ways, kind of rotationally. I'm really hesitant to say rotation because this is mostly all priorities. Frostbolt is our filler spell. We're using it to gain procs. We're using it to gain. Let me get in the artifact abilities here. To gain chain reaction. Where is it? Here it is. So Frostbolt crits empower Ice Lance. They increase the damage dealt by them by 10%, stacking up 3 times for 6 seconds. So every time your Frostbolt crits, it buffs your Ice Lance up to 3. And it's just a nice little passive, not something you really have to worry about. But I mean, Frostbolt does a lot for us. So like I said, it does damage, it gains procs, it gains chain reaction, and it also reduces the cooldown on Icy Veins, which is pretty much what Thermal Void really revolves upon. So every time Frostbolt crit, see if I can find it here. Really gotta get better at remembering what these icons look like. Where is it? Well, you know what? I have it right here. It's Frozen Veins. So every time Frostbolt crits, it reduces the remaining cooldown on Icy Veins. And that kind of goes up in ranks. So, Frostbolt, as you can tell, does a lot for us. So that's your filler spell, that's your bare minimum. When you have nothing else going on, you want to be casting a Frostbolt. When you have a Fingers of Frost proc up, you probably want to cast a Frostbolt, and then cast that Fingers of Frost right after it. When you have that Brain Freeze proc, you want to cast that Brain Freeze right after that Frostbolt, make that Frostbolt crit. And that kind of glues the whole spec together. It's really cool. I mean, Frost is fast paced, and this definitely is a fun spec worth playing. But a lot of people have issues with it, and it's because it comes with a lot of on the fly decision making, which you get with experience. Sometimes when you first start playing, you're just like, oh crap, like what do I do? But other times you're like, okay, well, I know I've seen this before, and this is what I should do. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a rotation, and I have the legendary gloves, and these kind of change the way you play a little bit, so I'm going to take that out. That just gives me a Fingers of Frost charge every 10 seconds when I have Icy Veins up, and you can kind of play with it in an intricate way as far as tracking when you get those and how you play around them. So I'm going to swap those out for some gloves, just random gloves, and Whispers of the Dark. I'm going to take that out as well and just put in a regular trinket. Whispers is really good, but it's also really bad. I'm probably just going to leave that up for discussion at another time. Okay, so say we're going to have a pull here. And we have DBM countdown on the boss. You typically would want to pre-pot. I use Potion of Prolonged Power. That's pretty much once you get high into your artifact Paragon traits, and you get percentage increased damage, this gets better. But anyways, you would pre-pot, and around like 3 seconds you start casting your Ebon Bolt. And for the opener, you go Ebon Bolt into Icy Veins, and when that Ebon Bolt is cast, it procs Brain Freeze, so you go Brain Freeze, and then Brain Freeze applies that Winter's Chill, which will make the Ebon Bolt crit under Icy Veins, so you get that 20% damage increase from Chill to the Core. And then you follow that up with an Ice Lance. And then you want to start really getting into your abilities, your Water Jet, and your Frozen Orb. So we'll go through it quick, and we'll see. So right before I do start that, I actually just thought about this now, is all this stuff down here. These are all weak auras, and these are really important to help me see my abilities and when they're coming off cooldown. It kind of helps me plan things and see what's coming up. Because with Thermal Void, it's really about just trying to get as much out of your Icy Veins as possible. So the quicker you can get these going, the better, typically. So you'll see as I start using them, they'll go on cooldown here. And this just lets me see all the main abilities. And it's very important just to try and track those and have that information for you at the ready when you're raiding. Alright, so here we go. We'll precast that Ebon Bolt, Icy Veins into Flurry, and our Ice Lance. I'm going to start going Water Jet. Use those procs. I'm getting kind of lucky here. So you can see I'm doing the Frost Bolt into the Flurry, into the Ice Lance. And that procced as soon as I went with the Frozen Orb. Now, during Frozen Orb, I'm trying to not cast Frostbolt into the Brain Freeze as much as possible, just because I'm getting so many Rings of Frost procs. I don't want to waste any. So you see after that was done, my Water Jet came back up. So I used 2 there. I've got my Icy Veins tracking here. It's about 10 seconds, which is not bad. My Ebon Bolt's coming up soon. Icy Vein, the Ice Lance after the Flurry again. So now I have the Brain Freeze. I'm going to use that right away, and then it procs another one after the Ebon Bolt. Alright, so I just lost my Icy Veins, and that was a minute 30, which kind of sucks. I mean, I was expecting a little bit more, but I'm so used to the gloves. Let me start my water elemental here. So that wasn't the greatest, but typically you'll see better uptimes without the gloves if you have Heroism, or Bloodlust, or Time Warp, whatever you may choose. A lot of the pulls where you can use that on pull, that's very beneficial. It helps your cast go a lot faster, and you get a lot out of your procs, and hopefully reduce this. Let's see. So now that you kind of get the rotational stuff going, go over some of the talents. So the talents that I used for that right there are Bone Chilling. I mean, if you're gonna use your Water Elemental, you want to use Bone Chilling. This pretty much just stacks up a buff that helps you do more frost damage. Stacks up to 12 times. Things like Blizzard can stack it up really fast on multiple targets. But pretty much it's a passive. It's a set it and forget it. You don't really worry about it. It's just a passive increase frost damage. The other thing in this row is Lonely Winter. And recently a lot of people are playing with Lonely Winter. And it's actually really good. I mean, you definitely get lower Icy Veins up times. But it really increases the damage of your other core spells. I mean, Frostbolt, Ice Lance, Flurry, Frozen Orb, they all deal 28% increased damage. And that's, I mean, once you get started with higher gear levels, it seems to be taking over Bone Chilling. But it fluctuates for me at least. And I can kind of choose which one to use on different bosses, which is kind of nice. I mean, it's nice if you're in a world where you can just choose something based on what's better for you from a fight-to-fight basis, and not one just being great all the time. Alright, so we're going on to our next row. We have Shimmer. That's what I take for most fights now. I mean, I was really addicted to Ice Wolves for a while, but once you get used to Shimmer, it's actually pretty useful, especially if you're doing a lot of mechanics. I mean, in Nighthold, there's a lot of ranged mechanics, and being able to blink twice and blink during the GCD, like while you're casting something, is really good. And there's so many unsaid things that you can do with Shimmer that just you see and experience. Something like if you're on Chronomatic Anomaly and you're in his Annihilation phase where you're spinning around with the laser beam, you can just sit there casting, and when it comes close to you, you can just shimmer right through and keep casting, and then do it a second time on the way back. So I mean, you barely even have to move. So that's something that's it's really understated, and it takes practice, but it's really good. And, I mean, Ice Flows, you can do sort of the same thing. You can cast while moving, but you only get 3. And I found myself losing out on charges quite often because I just use them so fast. But if you have Shimmer, it really makes you practice like stutter step casting, like where you cast an instant, and during that GCD lock where you can't do anything, you move a bit. So it's like you get your Frostbolt, Ice Lance, and you see the stuff moving around. You can't actually cast during that. So when that's happening, you move a step or two, and then kind of slowly move to something. And that's something that you can work with. Anyways, the other one is glacial insulation, and I mean I'm not even really gonna bother talking about that. It's just we shouldn't really be using that, especially for rating. So then we got our next row. It's mirror image. This actually is decent. It's a decent cooldown, but not a lot of people are using it. I mean, in order for it to be good, you have to cast it pretty much on cooldown, and you should try and sync it up to any cooldowns that you have. So Icy Veins, because these what mirror image does is it makes 3 copies of you, and they last 40 seconds, but they inherit your stats. So, well, they inherit your stats except for mastery. But if you combine it with something like Icy Veins, they're getting an extra nice boost to their haste, and that's definitely helpful. But yeah, I mean it's like a set it and forget it cooldown. I mean you use it, and they just do their thing, and then you just keep doing your rotation. It is nothing really involved in that. The only thing is I know there's certain bosses, I can't think of any at the moment like on the fly, but they can actually be targeted and they can die to things, which kind of sucks. But for the most part, they don't. Next one's Rune of Power. I don't actually know any Frost Mages that use Rune of Power right now. I mean, in the past it was Rune of Power with Ray of Frost, but again, not many people use this, so it's not really worth mentioning. Maybe in the future, we'll see. But it needs some changes to be good. And Enchantress Flow. Enchantress Flow, and I'm really happy with this one because it's, again, a set it and forget it thing. I mean, Frost has a lot of on the fly decision making, and it's a pretty fast paced spec, which is awesome. So, I mean, the less things you have to worry about while you're doing that, typically better. And Incanter's Flow just is like a passive boost. It kind of goes, it buffs you up and buffs you down a little bit on a cycle. And you shouldn't even really have to think about it. I mean, some people can track it so that way they're at high stacks and maybe they'll wait a second or two to throw out like a Fingers of Frost Ice Lance as long as they're not overcapping. But I mean, that's a little advanced, and honestly, it's probably not even that much more DPS to do that. And you could actually lose DPS doing that. So it is kind of risky. But anyways, I mean, like I said, set it and forget it. It's a nice passive. It's a damage boost. Let's get on to our next row here. You see I was using Frozen Touch. Frozen Touch, again, it's a passive. Increases your chance to generate Fingers of Frost by 40%. Summon your Frost Bolts, 40%. It's not additive. I mean, it's not like you have 40% extra chance each Frostbolt, which would be kind of insane, but it's multiplicative. So, I mean, it's still a good boost. You get more procs that way, but it's not crazy. It used to be so that way you could have an on use and generate 2 procs right away on the 30-second cooldown, I believe it was. And that was really good. I loved it like that. But, I mean, it was a little too powerful. We were getting 100% Icy Veins up times in the first tier. So, I mean, Blizzard probably didn't want that. So they kind of nerfed it a little bit. But we got Ice Nova here. Ice Nova is not typically used in raiding. Some people use it in dungeons, Mythic Plus. I mean, it's a nice little AoE ability. 25-second cooldown. But not really worth mentioning as far as rating. So the other one that we would go to is Splitting Ice here. These are the two that I swap between the most out of all my talents. Frozen Touch and Splitting Ice. Frozen Touch I use mostly for single target. I mean, strictly for single target. That's it. Everything else is Splitting Ice. What Splitting Ice does is it makes your Ice Lances and Icicles deal 5% more damage, and they also hit a second target for 80% of that damage. So, I mean, you get really good cleave. I mean, Frost is one of the best single target casters in the game, and you can cleave a second target really, really effectively. So that's pretty much what it does. I mean, anytime it's single target, you're going Frozen Touch. Anytime it's not, you're going Splitting Ice, which is really awesome. I mean, some people simming their characters actually sim Splitting Ice over Frozen Touch on single target just because of that 5% gain. So it's something that you can kind of mess with. I mean, you do see less uptime, less Icy Veins uptime with Frozen Touch. I mean, with Splitting Ice compared to Frozen Touch, but it's really not that much of a DPS difference. The next one's Utility Tier. We got Frigid Winds. I mean, that just slows things. That's pretty cool in Mythic Plus. I mean, even on something like Botanist, where you are kind of CCing the plants that spawn, the fetters. I mean, just that additional movement speed slow is definitely helpful. I typically just precast Blizzard on top of them, and then I just get to work on with Splitting Ice. Another one's Ring of Frost. Not really used very much, mostly in PvP, but it's not a PvP video, so we won't really concern ourselves with it. And Ice Word is blah. So next one, another damage row, which is great. We have Frost Bomb here. Frost Bomb it's in a position where it can be really good, but you have to be very good at using it. And for me, the upside doesn't really do much for me. Um, what Frostbomb is it lets you cast it on a target and it just sits there. It doesn't do anything. You have to do something with it. So it sits on there for 12 seconds, and every time you hit a frozen ice lance into it, which means a Fingers of Frost proc or the follow-up ice lance from the Brain Freeze through the Winter's Chill debuff that we talked about earlier. Anytime you do that, it's gonna explode to all enemies within 10 yards for X amount of damage. Is it 63,000 base damage, which is great. That's really good, decent AOE, but you got to keep it up, and you have to use your ice lances into it. I mean, anytime that you don't shoot an ice lance into a frost bomb when you take that talent, it's just going to be a DPS decrease. I mean, it's not. It's something that you have to really play perfectly to gain results from, and it's not the easiest thing to play with. And you also got to think about it because you're spending a GCD and the cast time to put up Frostbomb to kind of do nothing. And when you're trying to extend your Icy Veins for as long as possible when you're raiding, that could be detrimental. But there is an upside. I mean, if you do play it perfectly and you don't lose any time from it, it could be really good. Which is the reason why it sims really high. Because the Sims are robots and they can play perfectly. And we're humans and we can think we can play perfectly, but it's close and we don't. So this one here that I take is Unstable Magic. Again, it's another passive. Frostbolt has a 20% chance to explode on impact, which deals 50% additional damage to that target that you hit, and other enemies within 8 yards. It's nice, but I mean it's really, really minor damage, and it's just something. Pretty much single target is the only time you would use this. Anytime you have more than one target, if you have 2 targets, you want to take Arctic Gale. Increases Blizzard's damage by 30% and its area of effect by 20%. And the best thing that Blizzard did recently is that they made Blizzard reset the cooldown of Frozen Orb, which is great. So that way, when you do have 2+ targets, it becomes worth it to use Blizzard on them. On 2 targets, I don't usually use it on cooldown. I use my procs up, and then I'll use it before Frostbolt, kind of like a lower priority type deal. But anytime you're AoEing, I mean, you want to use that on cooldown as much as possible, like 3+ targets. You'll see like how fast your frozen orbs come up, and on enough targets, you can get multiple frozen orbs going out there at the same time. It's ridiculous. But anyways, I mean, if you're gonna be using 2 targets, if you're gonna be using Blizzard on 2 targets, you want to take advantage of that. You want to use Arctic Gale. And then the next talent row we went over at the beginning of the video, Thermal Void. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. This is the whole thing. The whole Frost spec for rating that I'm talking about, besides Glacial Spike. Comet Storm you can use in Mythic Plus, but Thermal Void is just extending that Icy Veins for as long as possible. Okay, so we've kind of gone over it. Let's see if I missed anything here. Don't think I did, at least primarily. Let's take a look at the chat since I'm streaming this. So it says, what do you do if you begin Water Jet and you get 1 FOF proc and 1 BF proc on the first Frostbolt? Alright, that's a good question. I don't think I can get that going to show you guys that fast, because it's kind of luck. So pretty much what you do is you would finish that second Frostbolt, because you want to get that second Fingers of Frost while that Water Jet is going. You don't want to miss that. And then you would use your 2 Fingers of Frost procs, and then you would go into like the Frostbolt, into the Brain Freeze proc that you got, and then an Ice Lance to follow it up. So I mean, you always want to prioritize your Fingers of Frost before your Brain Freeze, specifically for that Winter's Chill debuff. So that way you can get rid of those procs so you don't waste any, and you can use a non-FOF Ice Lance into that Winter's Chill after the Brain Freeze. How does Mirror Image interact with Icy Veins and Bloodlust? I think I mentioned that earlier. Mirror Image inherits haste. I mean, it inherits all your stats but mastery. So if you get a haste buff, I mean, they're going to get it. And it happens dynamically too. You don't have to cast one before the other. I mean, there might be a slight delay on it, but they'll grab it. Lonely Winter BC, Bone Chilling. Again, I mean, it could be preference. If you want to take the easy route and you don't have to worry about messing around with a pet and having it bug out on certain things or be out of range of certain things that you're trying to do. Like, say you're attacking a boss way over here and your water elemental is going to town and you need to freeze something over here, like on Botanist, where you want to freeze those parasitic fetters for those two really, really nice instant Fingers of Frost procs. All of a sudden, you're over here and you're trying to do it, and your water elemental is way over here, and he's out of range. So, I mean, if he can't grab it, then you're not going to be able to get it. But, I mean, you're not going to have Frost with only Winter anyways. I mean, you're going to have Freeze with that. But, I mean, that's just kind of like a thing that came to the top of my head. I mean, there are people who don't want to play with a pet. I mean, the same thing with Hunter specs. I mean, there's an option for Marksman Hunters not to play with a pet, and most of them take it because it's, well, we're not going to get into that. But it's an option, and it's really close in DPS. So, I mean, you don't really suffer from picking it. Alright, let's see here. Can you get 4 Fingers of Frost procs with Water Jet, with Lust, Icy Veins, and Trinket Haste? No. You can't. It's just, it doesn't add up. I mean, there's a potential to maybe get 3, but it's like milliseconds. You have to be super perfect to actually get it, and I've never done it. I don't really try to do it. It's just, it's not really worth it in my opinion. So you don't lead Brain Freeze procs with Frostbolt while Frozen Orb is up to reduce munching. Yeah, that's something I'm trying to, actually, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, where I want to track my Frozen Orb duration, because I had the cooldown here, but I want to put the duration here too, just so I can see when it's over, because you should play slightly differently when you have Frozen Orb up. When you have Frozen Orb up, you get that chance to get Fingers of Frost procs, and sometimes you can just get overloaded with them, which is really cool. But if you have a Brain Freeze proc, and like I was saying before, whenever you have a Brain Freeze proc, you want to go Frostbolt into Brain Freeze into Ice Lance. The only problem with that is as you're Frostbolting and you get the Brain Freeze proc, you could get a Fingers of Frost proc during that duration, which would kind of waste it. So during the Frozen Orb, when you have a really high chance to get Fingers of Frost procs that you can't really control, the best thing you can try and do is not to cast that Frostbolt and just do Brain Freeze into Ice Lance. I mean, yeah, you still get a chance where you're going to gain it as soon as you're in the GCD and you're casting it, but I mean, it's less chance than having that whole Frostbolt cast and have it proc during then. But otherwise, I mean, you typically, outside of Frozen Orb, you typically want to go Frostbolt first into Brain Freeze. And that's the other thing I was talking about with the gloves and how you can play differently with them, is that I have it, if I hit Icy Veins here, you'll see I have this down here, and this will track my procs gained for my gloves. So as this gets down low, I know I'm not going to be casting a Frostbolt into my Brain Freeze, because I'm going to waste it because I'm going to gain a proc here. So what I would do is just the same thing as during Frozen Orb. I would quickly cast a Brain Freeze into Ice Lance, and then it would proc, and then I'd get another Ice Lance. It's just something to track, and I know a lot of people aren't lucky enough to get the gloves, but hey. Alright, any other questions here? Looks like about all the questions. I'll give you guys a minute. Let's see, I can actually go through and put on my gloves again. Put on my trinket again. And we'll see how long with these single target talents I can keep Icy Veins going. Except I have to wait 2 minutes, because I forgot I just hit it to show you guys that. Sometimes I get 10 plus Fingers of Frost procs from Frozen Orb. Yeah, I mean, that's just, it can be really good or really bad. I mean, I've had times, even with the 4-piece, the 4-piece tier set, where you get 5% extra chance to get Fingers of Frost. I've had it only proc once. I mean, that's just the luck. I mean, sometimes you just get it where you can almost barely keep up with the amount of procs you get, and other times you get one. So, I mean, that's just kind of how it is. Do I like the Whisper's Trinket? For the most part. I mean, on paper, it's a super good trinket. I mean, if you look at it, you got a good boost to intellect, and your damaging spells have a chance to grant you increased casting speed by 40% for 12 seconds, which is really insane. And then you get the downside of it is when that expires, you lose some casting speed, so you go slower for 16% for 8 seconds, which is not bad. I mean, the upside is definitely really, really good, and it kind of makes up for the downside. But you run into some issues that you don't see on paper that you do see in game and in the real world of Warcraft. But when that procs, I have a 25% buff haste here, baseline from my gear, and I mean that's not a crazy amount, but it's decent. I mean even if I go lower, you'll see this. Is what happens is that when that procs, especially during Icy Veins or during Time Warp, is that your haste will be so high, your casting speed will be so insane that you go below the GCD cap. I mean, the GCD cap is at 0.75 seconds, and you're casting your frost bolts at say zero point 0.6 seconds, which means that in the time that it takes your frost bolt to cast, say if that was zero point 0.6 seconds, you're casting before the GCD actually triggers and finishes. So I mean you're kind of like you really have to like spam it, and it's really like disjointed mechanically, um, because it's just it's really hard to describe. You'd have to actually see it because you're just spamming away at it, and it's like a wait period because your cast is actually faster than the time where you have to wait. It's very frustrating, especially when you have to cast procs after casts and things don't line up correctly because you get this time where you're waiting and you're just super fast and it's just like the game's broken. It really is. And then the slow speed, I mean, you get a certain muscle memory as far as your casts when you start playing Frost, and you know when my cast is gonna end, when I can cast the instant, and when you're making on the fly haste changes like that periodically, if you're not used to them, you kind of screw up. And it happens to me. I mean, if I am entering the slow period of that proc and I'm casting that Frostbolt and I go for the Brain Freeze, and right away I'm casting that follow up Ice Lance, then sometimes it misses. Sometimes I don't hit that Ice Lance because I think I'm in that spell queuing period during the GCD, and then I go right into the Frostbolt afterwards, and it doesn't actually cast the Ice Lance, and I cast Frostbolt instead. So I kind of lose that. Oh, I forgot my pet was on passive, so that might have actually helped me keep Icy Veins up, but whatever. Okay, another question here. Back to my water jet question earlier. What if you're in a situation and you are at the awkward range when there is downtime before the second frostbolt hits during water jet? Okay. Yeah, I do see this sometimes. Most of the time. I wait like the quarter of a second just so I can get that off. I mean, what he's saying is pretty much when you're casting your water jet, if you're casting fast enough, there's a period in here. I don't have it because I'm not at higher haste, but there's a period in there where you have kind of like an open GCD in between your procs. So it's like, do I cast the Ice Lance? Do I cast the Frostbolt? Do I just sit there and wait? What happens if I procs? And typically when that happens, like if I'm shooting off my procs, I can shoot off an extra non-FOF Ice Lance by accident. So, I mean, I usually just wait the quarter of a second because it's really, really quick. I mean, it's barely noticeable. It's only noticeable when you have higher haste. I mean, maybe I could throw out a Frostbolt or something, but I mean, it's in between when you get that first FOF proc and when you get that second FOF proc in the water jet. So, I mean, sometimes I cast that third Frostbolt, sometimes I wait the quarter of a second. Alright. Anything else here? Alright, so I'm going to go through and we'll do like a quick rotation on this with my gloves and the trinket, and we'll just see how it goes. Typically I can keep the Icy Veins up for a decent amount of time. I mean, it's not 100% anymore like it used to be in Emerald Nightmare, but I mean, it's decent enough where I can typically get a, it's really RNG based, so maybe like 40 to 60% uptime, which is decent. I mean, you really want to aim for 50% at optimal times. But people are getting a lot more, and there's other things that I haven't mentioned here, like a double Ice Lance. But I don't really want to get into that because it's a little advanced play, and it's probably going to go away because Blizzard doesn't want it to happen. But anyways, here we go. So very strangely, I had my Whispers proc right away. Usually that doesn't happen. You can see I have my current haste over here too. That's kind of helpful when I was talking about that double Ice Lance thing. Before I get into Water Jet, I want to also make sure that I don't have any Brain Freeze procs. Just so I don't waste anything. It's gonna be a close one before I get the proc from my gloves. There we go, got it. So you can see the gloves definitely help out a lot. I'm already at my second Frozen Orb here, which is really nice. I'm gonna go ahead and cast this before that. I'm just gonna keep on using your procs here before you actually try to get more. Just don't want to overcap. So I already had 3 there for a couple seconds while using them. I'm still hovering around like 10 to 12 seconds, which is really good. It's not bad. I mean, I don't have a flask, I don't have food, I'm doing like 850k. It's decent. And my Icy Vein still has 30 seconds until it comes up. And I'm still at around 10 seconds uptime left. So I mean, I'm in really good shape here. And I'm actually gonna get back to back here. So this is actually really good. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. I mean, so that's actually a really good pull. I mean, if you do have the gloves and you get some good luck, if you can sit there and tunnel bosses, I mean, you're just gonna be skyrocketing on DPS. Alright, let's see. Would your guild want another sexy Frost Mage? We currently raid with 3 mages, and I'm the only Frost Mage, actually. The other 2, one's tried Frost, but he didn't have the legendaries for it, and he didn't really enjoy it without the legendaries, so he went back to Fire. But the other 2 are Fire, and I don't know why they're not Frost, honestly, but hey, I mean, what can you do? I guess it can only be one. Do you think Dutch is a good mage? Yes, I think Dutch is a very good mage. I want the gloves. Yeah, don't we all? I'm sorry you don't have them. It's just, these gloves, I don't know how they haven't seen a nerf, because they are really good. I mean, it's probably why I stuck with Frost from the beginning, is because I got them pretty early. And Frost was bad back then at the beginning of the expansion. They are deceptively good. Because at first look, if you don't know Frost and you don't know mages too well, you look at them and you're like, whatever. Like, 1 every 10 seconds for your Icy Veins. Your Icy Veins doesn't last that long, so whatever. But when you start getting into times where you can extend your Icy Veins, they help you so much. And they're so good. Let's see, I have gloves and want bracers. Yeah, I mean, bracers are good too. So I mean, every time you shoot off an Ice Lance, it buffs your next Ice Lances by 3% for 8 seconds, stacks up to 6 times. So I mean, 6 times 3, 18%. If you can keep that going, your Ice Lances do super damage. I mean, and if you have Lonely Winter, your Ice Lances do 28% more damage. So you can see where things can kind of compound together and do some pretty crazy stuff. And that's something that I'm still thinking about, is Lonely Winter and Bone Chilling. Because, like I said, I've been simming back and forth every time I get a piece of gear, and it's like, one sim Lonely Winter would be better, another sim Bone Chilling will be better. So they're so close that it really depends on the fight. Like, I used Lonely Winter on Crosus, because Crosus is like, he's got a huge hitbox, he's difficult to get your water jet off properly. and Lonely Winter was easier to play in that regard. And you can get your water jet to give you 2 procs very consistently on Crosus. You just have to do it right. I mean, typically, like when I was showing you, you want to cast that water jet at near the end of your first cast. On Crosus with a big hitbox and large distance for travel time, you want to do it to the end of your second Frostbolt. So you would go like Frostbolt, Frostbolt, Water Jet, and then you would get your couple of Ice Lances. But it's like it's really delayed and it feels very strange and disjointed. It feels like they kind of appear out of nowhere, which isn't really the best gameplay, like mechanically. Let's see. Bellavir was my first legendary. I got the Blink Chest. I'm sorry, guys. It is actually good. The Blink Chest has super good stats, and you get a defensive out of it. Which I mean, no, maybe it's not a DPS legendary, but I mean it's decent. It's obviously not the best of the best, but I wouldn't be too sad if I got that. 'Cause, I mean, there definitely are certain legendaries like Magnum Opus where you get the shield, which has super good stats and it's over budget. And there's a lot that can be said for having high DPS legendaries. Obviously, I mean I don't really have to get into that, but there's a really good advantage to having defensive ones, especially if you're pushing content. If you're in mythic content, I mean that extra shield could be the meaning between life and death, which does more damage for you than a DPS legendary would. I mean, I know a lot of us don't see bleeding edge content like that. Like, we're not inside the top 10 guilds in the world pushing that stuff at under gear, but I mean, that definitely helps. Are you simming with the double Ice Lance APL? No, I'm not. I do the double Ice Lance, I take advantage of it, that's for sure. It's awesome, but I don't expect it to last, and I'm not gonna sim with it. I mean, it's nice to see the higher numbers, but there's really no point because Blizzard's already made it clear that they do not want us to be hitting 2 non-FOF Ice Lances into Winter's Chill at any haste or distance. So they kind of screwed up when they fixed it, and we can still take advantage of it, but I mean, it's not something that I'm gonna gear for. But yeah, splitting ice only winter does gain more value using it because you're obviously having more ice lances crit. All right, I think I've covered most of the stuff I want to cover. Um, I'm gonna put this on YouTube. I'm gonna put my weak ores inside the description. I'm gonna put my written guide into the description that's on the Altered Time forums. And if you guys have any more questions, I'll be on the Altered Time Discord. I'll also put that onto the description. And I think that's it. So thank you guys for watching, and stay frosty, my friends.